Hamishasar Be'av, 15th of Av, we went into this pasuk that there's an advantage in the land over everything, and even the king is subservient to the field. Right? As it says in Koheles. This is actually not the right page.
Okay.
You have one though, right? It's on the other side. Turn that around. There you go. And we basically said that he also has it. Yeah. We said that the land and the field represent this world and Gan Eden, right? Because the field is like the choice part of the land. And in general, the reason that there's a difference between them is because there's a difference in their source, where they get their life force from, which is different aspects of the sphere of Malchus. Right? That's from the Dibur of Malchus, which is the most external part of Malchus. That's called the existence of the world that comes from that place. That's called Aretz, the regular land. And Gan Eden gets its life force from the Gimel Rishonos, the first three spheros of Malchus, which is called Panemius of Malchus. Right? And therefore it's called a field.
So the field represents
the choice of the land, Gan Eden. Right? Okay, so we gave a little bit of a explanation to that. The Dibur of Malchus, which is, for example, the 10 statements of creation, right? The Asara Maimaros is coming from the Dibur of Malchus, the lowest part of Malchus. Its inyan is to bring existence into being, just like this speech of man that's purely for the sake of the other, right? So the whole purpose of speech really is to convey something to the other. So it's championing the idea of outside of you. And therefore, the Asara Maimaros, they're all about creating the existence of the other. As we said yesterday, when we speak to another. We don't make the other with our speech. But by Hashem, the aspect of speech actually creates the other. So the whole notion of like separateness and other comes from the lowest part of Malchus. This is what the Asara Maimaros, the 10 statements of creation, are. Whereas the Gimel Reishin of Malchus, the higher part of the sphere of Malchus of Hashem, which is called Panemius of Malchus, it receives from Yesod, right? It's not merely a giver, and it's not all about sort of output and something external to it. It has a shaykhis to, something inward, and it to be a receiver as well. And that's the idea that it receives from Yesod, which is called Siyum HaAtzilus, right? Yesod is called the end of Atzilus proper, even though Malchus, as we said yesterday, is also part of Atzilus, but it represents that within Atzilus, which is already the existence of the other inside of Atzilus. So the end of Atzilus sort of proper is Yesod.
When you say the other, do you mean like when the speech comes down, that's like a usage of it?
Like the whole world exists also inside of God Himself.
Right.
So the existence of the other inside of Hashem is basically Malchus.
Right, and the other is what we talk to. Like Hashem uses Dibor in order to create things, we use Dibor in order to communicate with the other.
Yeah.
And that's inside of.
Right. So, but we're saying there's two parts of speech, right? One is exclusively about the other, and one is actually still sort of having a relationship with what's going on inside. Right. So if you think about it, it's basically mashpia and makabel, right? Something is mashpia. He's all about giving out, and his whole existence is basically the other. The makabel, it's kind of quite the contrary, right? His whole existence is about what's above him and receiving something inside of him.
Because you have to have what to say before you can say it.
Right.
Mashpia and makabel.
And again, even further than that. Even if you're not it's not for the sake of saying it. It's just two different roles to play. One is to receive and one is to give, right? So he's more focusing on that for the time being. That there's a difference in quality, right, between these two levels of Malchus. So much so that the one, when it winds up creating, it even when it is giving out, it gives out in a completely different way. The higher part of Malchus, when it creates and speaks, it speaks Gan Eden, right? Its whole presentation is one that it's still connected with its source. Whereas the lower part of Malchus, it's not connected with its source. So when it speaks like a total other, which is not really anymore related to what's going on inside of God in such an obvious way.
It means the midos, right? You said yesterday.
Well, we're going to get to that in 1 second. Yeah. Okay. And so he brings up the union of midos now. Yeah. But slightly, he's going to bring it up again, I think, to your point. Here he's saying that basically the union of the end of Atzilus, which is Yesod, this is the union of the midos of a person. That we're saying that if you think about midos, even though they are in general related to the other, right? Because when you have emotions, it's not, for example, we said as opposed to intellect, whereas intellect is purely to yourself. When you're thinking, you're basically the other person actually disturbs you from accessing your intellect. Right? It's not about the other. Whereas emotionally, it's not necessarily all for the other. It's happening inside of you, but it's about the other. Like your emotions are basically extending outward.
Right.
So to Yesod, we're just talking about this level of Yesod, which the higher part of Malchus is receiving from. It's not all about the other, even though it's connected. Midos are connected with the other. Their main inyan is that the person is aroused. The person himself is having the experience. So it's really an inyan of connected with self and not other. And since the higher part of Malchus is receiving from that, it gets that feeling of something that's still for itself, something that's still connected to Hashem, as opposed to just being strictly for the other. You following this a little bit? Yeah? Okay. So we went further. This is a review. And we said there's another reason why Gan Eden has this advantage over the regular world. And that's because in general, the world is more associated with midos, right? And the Gan Eden is more associated with mochin, with mind. Even though we just got through saying, right, that the higher part of Malchus receives from the midos, okay, that's like one sort of model that we're looking at, right? That in general, if you have the lower part of Machus and the higher part of Machus, the lower part of Machus doesn't even touch the sphere of Yesod. So it's far from the midos, right? Whereas the higher part of Machus touches it. That's in one general way. We could say there's like a closeness of contact between the higher part of Machus and Yesod. But in another dimension, which delineates these two concepts, is that in general, the lower part of Malchus is speech, which is only able to be speech and access of the emotional aspect of a person. In other words, speech itself, as we said yesterday, can be in two dimensions. You can speak, so to speak, as a revelation of your emotions, or you can speak as a revelation of your intellect. Right? Let's say that again. Right? Your speech is basically a kli which conveys what's going on inside of you. It's a vessel which conveys what's going on inside of you. So there's such a regular speech, which is more associated with creation of the worlds. That's a speech which allows the emotion to invest itself into it, and then it expresses emotion. Versus a speech which is actually able to link into the actual mind, the Chochmah, Bina, and Das, and it's more of like a direct, your mind directly, bypassing the emotions, speaks, what's going on in an intellectual framework, without being first wrapped up in the emotions.
So that's what you're doing now?
That's Torah in general, right? I don't say I'm doing it now.
Yeah, you're speaking.
But in general, it's like if a person, it's like what Moshe does. It's not necessarily that a regular person who's just sort of winging it is doesn't have his intellect also engaged with his emotions. But in general, it's the difference between Torah and regular stam talk, right? Regular worldly talk is basically a talk which is primarily geared with emotions, right? And pure Torah dialogue, right, is something where the words grasp right onto the intellect. So again, this is the difference between Gan Eden and the regular world. That when Hashem creates the regular world, He allows His intellect first to be enclosed into emotion before it comes out and gets spoken into creation. And when He creates Gan Eden, it's like His intellect is right away wrapped up into speech, and it creates therefore on a completely higher dimension.
So what are they? We're like navigating between like the spheros and between like this like dual like Gan Eden Olam like this world
Yeah.
type of thing.
Yeah.
So what could we just like real quickly just like I have this right down?
Mhm.
What is the correlation between like the intellect sphere road? What does that one look like, and what is the emotional one? Now, we keep talking about Machus and Yesod.
Right. So I would like to. I mean, I drew it yesterday. Adam, do you have that little piece of paper? Right.
What do we got here?
It's not so easy to see, but you see, this is Malchus down here, right? This is the lower part of Malchus, the higher part of Malchus.
Oh, all the way down there.
Yeah, so this is the Chochma Bina Das, Chesed Gvura Tiferes Netzach Hod Yesod, and Malchus is this big one.
Oh, Malchus
which,
is the bottom one.
Malchus is the bottom sphera. That's,
Okay.
yes. So in Malchus itself, we're saying there's 10 spheros. Okay?
Oh, no way.
And not only that, but in Malchus of Malchus, we actually mention that there's 10 spheros, because there's 10 Asara Maimaros. There's the 10 statements of the speech of creation, right? So this produces like its own 10 spheros, which actually becomes like the source of the world.
Are they distinct spheres, or are they just like different pattern? Like, is it
They're
the
distinct
same
spheros.
Is it the same pattern?
Same pattern, exactly. Oh, yeah, is that what you mean? No, they're the same
Right.
exact 10,
Right.
just on a different dimension.
Right.
So, but before we're getting into all that, that's a little bit too much complexity. So you have here what we discussed as the lower part of Malchus, the higher part of Malchus, right? So in general, you can see the lower part of Malchus is far away from Yesod, whereas the higher part of Malchus receives from Yesod.
Right.
So that's like sort of model one that we said, the difference between this realm, which creates Gan Eden, and this realm, which creates the regular world. Because remember, this whole area is called speech. So everything here creates.
Right.
It's just that this creates it still has a reception of Atzilus proper.
Right.
So it creates Gan Eden, and this one is it's already gone far away from Atzilus, and therefore it creates with really no recourse to Atzilus, and therefore it creates like a separate world.
It's still Machus?
It's still, this is Malchus of Malchus. All of this is Malchus.
Wow.
10 spheros in Malchus.
So it's like Machus is like
It's big.
yeah, because that's like where we are right now.
Well,
It's like Australia.
we're like all the way down here somewhere. We're like through the floor, maybe going to the crust of the earth.
Like the 10 of lower Machus or something like that.
These 10 spheros repeat themselves basically ad infinitum.
Really?
Yeah, they're just because each one is a dimension. Like this is the whole thing we're talking about right now is Atzilus. And then if you go down a level, for example, these 10 spheres of Malchus, like hatch, they become the light for the vessel of the lower three worlds. Yitzira, Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya. Okay?
Wow.
So to begin with, you're dealing with like a ray of a ray of a ray within the world of Atzilus, and then that itself becomes contracted to go down to the next world. So it's still 10 spheros, but it's like, for example, the difference between the 10 spheros of your brain versus the 10 spheres of your emotions versus the 10 spheres of your thought versus the 10 spheres of your speech and action, right? There's dimensions, basically. Look at it, for example, if you want to think of it simpler, think of it as man, animal, plant, inanimate, right? So the whole breed is just compared to a rock, compared to a person, that's like us compared to what we're talking about right now.
Wow.
So that being said, which is exciting in its own right, we're saying now this is one model that basically these two, Gan Eden, which is created from the three spheros, is more bright and lichtic because it has contact with Yesod, whereas the lower one has no contact with Yesod, therefore it creates a regular simple world.
Right.
There's another way of looking at it, which is that, and these big lines are here, in addition to which, these three spheros have sort of they have an access point to the intellect. Why? Because they're Chochma Bina and Das primarily. In other words, they receive from the mind, right? So when Malchus speaks from this level of Chochma Bina and Das, it's Chochma Bina and Das speaking. Whereas when it speaks from down here in Malchus, it's really these 7 emotional spheros that are the ones doing the speaking.
Right.
So besides this model, there's another model of just like, not so much that their proximity to Atzilus or not, but just the material with which they're able to speak from. The lower part of Malchus speaks only from the emotional dimension, and therefore it doesn't have it. What it speaks is not really intellectual, right? If there's intellect in there, of course there is in the world, but it's hidden, and it's sort of like the underlying natural rules and so forth. So you could see that there's a seichel, But it's not like the seichel is like revealed. What's revealed is pashit the olam. Whereas in the higher worlds, the seichel is revealed. When you go into the higher worlds, the underlying rules of nature are like glowing in front of you. You see all the designs and the patterns, like you don't have to go looking with a microscope. It's basically the intellect is speaking.
Right.
Okay. That's where we got up to yesterday. Oh, here you go. As we explained all this in the mimer from the Rebbe Rashav that this is based on. The Zesha Yesod, Nikr B'Shem Kol, this is new information now, we read into this yesterday. This, the Yesod, is called by the name Kol, which it just is. We find it in many different places. Right? Kol B'Shamayim Ba'aretz. I guess that's the source of it. It says, L'cha Hashem ha'gedula ha'gevura b'tiferes v'hanetzach v'ha'hod ki kol v'shamayim v'aretz l'cha Hashem ha'melucha. We say this every day. Basically, if you slow that down, what we just did is we say in the davening all the spheros by name up until Yesod and not including. So we say ha'gedula ha'gevura b'tiferes v'hanetzach v'ha'hod, the first 5 spheros pretty much by name, and then the next one we call it ki kol v'shamayim v'aretz. Everything in heavens and earth, which refers to Yesod, and then the final one we say L'cha Hashem HaMelucha, we say Malchus. So Yesod is not called Yesod, it's called Kol, because for whatever reasons Yesod is a very unique sphera that is still connected with everything above it, but as we just saw, it also has hashpah on what's below it. So that's why it's called the foundation. It's a very pivotal sphera. So anyway, it's called Kol. So we're saying one of the reasons why it's called Kol, Who al shem nun sharei bina shenimshachim bo. It's because all of the 50 gates of bina are drawn down into it. What does that have to do with 50 gates of bina? The word kol is gematria 50, right? Kol b'gematria nun. So we see that it's called kol for this reason. It's called by its number, as it were, in order to indicate that all the gateways of bina are drawn down into it. What's that?
No.
Yeah.
Hardest.
Yeah.
Ramak.
Okay. Yeah. V'lachein kevan shagan Eden hu panimi es hamalchus shemekabelas miyesod, and therefore, since Gan Eden, as we already discussed, comes from the inner part of Malchus, the higher part of Malchus, that itself receives from Yesod. Harei al yedei Yesod nimshachim v'Gan Eden gam hamochim. Therefore, this kind of puts the two pieces together. Fortunately, right? Those two models that we explained before are now become one. Because through this higher part of Malchus, receiving from Yesod, that means through Yesod into Malchus, it's also brought the inyan of Mochin, the mind. Why? Because Yesod, we just got through saying, is called Kol, because it receives from the 50 gates of Bina, which is the 50 gates of mind, and they actually transverse through into Yesod and down from Yesod into Malchus. But which part of Malchus? The higher part of Malchus. So this is why, even though we said a second ago, Malchus, the top of Malchus receives from Yesod, it also receives from the mind, because the Yesod is able to bring the mind through it, the 50 gates of mind. Getting this? That's what it means, that there's an advantage of the land in everything. Remember, you go back to the pasuk from Koheles, there's an advantage of the land, B'kol, he, Melech l'sadeh ne'avad, right? And we're saying that, just repeating the pasuk for a second here, there's an advantage of the earth, B'kol, because the king, even the king, is subjugated to the field. Meaning what? Shaisaron de aretz, that what is the advantage of the aretz? Right? Klalos ha'olam, which represents the lower part, the general notion of the world in general, she's havuso hi ma'adibur de Malchus, its existence comes merely from the speech of Malchus, not from the mind of Malchus. Hi bakol, hamshachas ha'yesod. Right? It's really what's the difference between them? Bakol, which is the idea of drawing down the inyan of Yesod. And through this drawing down the mind. So he says basically, the pasuk is trying to say that there's an advantage to the aretz, right, over and above Gan Eden. Why? Bakol. Because it has coal in it. Does that make sense? No. Because we just said that coal is Gan Eden. But what we really mean by that is that there's an advantage in the Aretz when it also gets coal in it. When the Aretz will have the shine of Gan Eden in it as well, then there's an advantage to the Aretz over Gan Eden.
Because it is both?
Because basically you're drawing down Gan Eden into the world, you wind up with heaven on earth, which is greater than heaven or earth.
That's only Mashiach time, right?
Okay, let's say it could even happen today.
And that's via Yesod?
Well, that's when Yesod. Yes, it's basically when Yesod is able to extend itself all the way down into the earth. So let's read the pasuk again. It says Yisuna Aretz. There's an advantage to the Aretz. What? Bakol, with having coal, right? And what does it mean? Is that the advantage of the earth, which is the general world, which is created by speech, it can have an advantage on Gan Eden when it has coal. When Yesod is drawn down all the way into it, Yesod is called coal. Then it draws the mochin, the mind, which is usually reserved for Gan Eden.
Right.
It's then drawn down godliness also into the general world, like Gan Eden would have. So then the earth becomes even more pristine than the heavens, because heaven on earth is greater than heaven alone.
Did you say
What
why?
we say before Baruch Shamar? The Shem Yichud Kusha Brichu Shchinte. That's to connect that level with that level. To connect the Yesod with Malchus
Sure.
straight.
Yeah, not necessarily straight.
Because if it's regular, it's there, but it's not connected straight.
Okay, in other words,
For the
Yeah.
Gimel Rishonos with the thing, with the Malchus.
yeah. Yeah, it's
So
basically.
that's what we're doing in davening. We're doing when we're doing mitzvahs.
Yeah, he's talking about when you say l'shem yichud kuchbrichu shchinte liachadash l'shem yudke bevavke. Right, we say before Baruch Shamar. So when you're trying to join yudke and vavke, it's a similar concept. You're trying to basically say that what goes on in the yichud of yudke, right, that special light which is associated with the yichud of the higher spheros, should draw down that also into the yichud of vavke, into the lower spheros. And that's also why we start off by saying Baruch Sha'amar V'haya. You know this little drasha? V'haya is Yud-K Vav-K with the Vav-K before the Yud-K. V'haya is basically Yud-K Vav-K, but in the pattern that we just basically prayed that we would manifest, that the Vav-K is primary. The lower spheros, in other words, having heaven on earth is greater than just having heaven stam in its place. So this is like the big chiddush, really. We're going to be discussing this thing in all different types of osios for the rest of the mimer, and it's exciting. He does it in a lot of interesting ways. But we didn't finish it yet. So he says, Melech l'sadeh ne'avad. How does it happen? Melech l'sadeh ne'avad. So in the simple meaning of this, in the verse, it just means even the king is subservient to the field. Right? So reading the verse simply, it means the earth has an advantage over everything, because even the king is subservient to the field. Meaning to say that no one can pride themselves and be a king unless they're eating from the vegetables of the field. In other words, ultimately the field is the king of all kings, right? Because everyone's subservient to it, right?
But is that true? We're referring to Hashem as the king. Are we not? Or is it not?
This is something that we see manifested over here. So obviously it comes from some sort of symbolic meaning above. Obviously there's levels of Hashem which is not subservient to anything, but
Right.
it must be that's not called Hashem as king.
Right.
Because even the king is subservient to the field.
Right.
Right? But don't forget the field is also Hashem. So I mean he's not jealous over here. But that's a simple reading. Right, but comes the Zohar, right, and he says, "Who Kamosha Kasub Zohar?" The Zohar says, "Man Melech, who's the king? Da Melech hilah. This is the higher king. This Chabel Sadeh, who gets joined to the field. Kad Ihu Nevad, when the field is worked, which means there's something called a higher king who only gets joined to the field when the field is worked." Because what does it say? It says that Melech l'sadeh ne'evad, right? So the way we translate that a minute ago is different than we're doing right now. Ne'avad then means that the king is subservient to the field. The king, as it were, serves the field. Right? Now we're saying Melech lisadem ne'avad means a completely different thing. It means there's a Melech when you have a worked field. When the field is worked, the Melech appears. Right? If the field is not worked, the Melech does not appear.
Right.
It's a different reading. Again, what's the field? Gan Eden, as opposed to the earth. So when the Gan Eden is worked, right? When the field is worked, which is called Sadeh Ne'evad, it's a worked field. Nase Amshachas HaKeser, this is now like Osios of the Kabbalah, it draws down Keser, who's called Melech Ilah, the higher king, who is completely beyond the Ishtalshlus, the framework of all those spheres that we just looked at. The Keser, which is above them, is not part of their system, it's beyond all of them. That's called the higher king. Whereas Melech, Machus, that little lower box, that's called the lower king.
It's the lowest king.
Yeah, well, it's actually not the lowest king. There we say Malchusacha Malchus Kolamim. That Malchus is the Malchus of all other worlds, which there's many other Malchus to come. But in Atzilus, it's the lowest. Right? But there's a high king, which is the king above all the worlds, called Melech Ilah. That guy gets drawn down when Gan Eden is worked, whatever that means. We're going to have to find that out. Right? So you can draw down Keser with a worked field. Okay.
So it's even higher than the first two ways we said.
Yeah, because the first two ways there was only a hamshacha from either mochin or midos, right? But Keser was not involved. Umevar ba'maimer. So he explains in the mimer again. All this is the mimer of the Rebbe Rashab.
So this is like kind of a game changer when you bring in Keser.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it just changes the whole game.
Yep, makes new rules, Keser.
Rules change every minute.
Umevar ba'maimer. The Maimers explains the as keshemeir b'malchus hakeser shelamayla mishtalshlus, that at that time when the field will be worked and it will shine into malchus, the keser which is above the ishtalshlus, kaima sihara b'ashlamusa. So it says at that moment you have achieved what's called the fullness of the moon, right? Kaima. It's been established, Sihara, the moon, Ba'ashlamusa, in its wholeness. So it's basically, this is like the 15th of the month, right? The full moon suddenly happens when Keser has been drawn down through working the field.
That's what he's saying, that's what the full moon is?
That's what he just said, that this, when Malchus, right, when it shines into Malchus, Keser, not just mind or heart, but Keser, which is above, then this creates a full moon. That's what creates a full moon.
Every month.
Yeah.
Wow.
Shemeira or gam b'chitzonis hamalchus, which means what? It means that the light shines even into chitzonius hamalchus. Let's look at what chitzonius hamalchus is again. Chitzonius hamalchus is the regular world, right? Which called dibur shemamalchus, that which created like stam, a regular world. And what do we say was the whole idea of there's an advantage of the earth over Gan Eden is when essentially Gan Eden comes down into the earth, right? When does Gan Eden come down into the earth? Now we're understanding when Keser appears. When Keser appears, it's a game changer because it's able to bring heaven down to earth. So that means that the lower worlds are also shining in full. Remember, let's think the moon represents basically the amount of godly light that's available in this world. The moon represents a reflection of the sun, which is basically sort of like Gan Eden or Havaya, into this lowly world. So it's usually minimal. We don't get the whole gamut of revelation. The full moon represents the full gamut of revelation. So when that's happening, you see that the heavenly light is also shining on the earthly light. And what he's saying now is that only happens when Keser comes into the picture. Because if Keser's not in the picture, heaven stays where heaven is, and earth stays where earth is.
What about Yesod though? What do we call that coal?
It's called coal.
Right.
Coal is basically called heaven.
Right.
And it's great. It's wonderful. It just does. It stays in heaven,
right,
unless Keser appears. When Keser appears, what is the functionality of Keser? Is that it brings heaven into earth, right? So when you see heaven and earth, you're not just seeing heaven and earth. You're seeing Keser because it's the only one responsible for enabling heaven and earth to exist at the same time.
Is it the enabler or is it like the doer? Like, is it the function? Like, does it do anything or does it just kind of like allow Like, what is coming down?
Well, here's the thing, right? What do we say? It's above the Ishtalshlus.
Right.
Ishtalshlus means the orderly notion of nature, basically.
And that's
So
what
nature
it
does
is.
not allow heaven to fit into earth. It doesn't, because the vessels of earth are too minimal to experience all that light. But when you have the game changer, as you said, of Keter is not limited to nature. That's the whole point. It's above the natural system. It's above heaven. It's above earth. Earth and heaven are both part of nature. Heaven has its nature. Earth has its nature, and they're not compatible. Or one's higher than the other. When Keter is there, it doesn't have the rules of nature. So it has no problem making heaven and earth be in the same place, because it's lacking all limitations.
There's no consequence. though?
The consequence is right. The consequence is that basically you have two opposite things happening simultaneously. I guess that's a consequence. But so this is what we're saying now, that the fullness of the moon represents basically the appearance of Keter, because you have all of the light inside of the world. Shemea or gam b'chitzonis Malchus, that the light is now shining also into the external part of Malchus, Dibur de Malchus, which we said was the Asara Maimaros Shebehem Nivra Olam, which is the 10 aspects of the speech of Malchus, which creates the world. That those extra 10 spheres that I didn't draw in the picture, they are now fully imbued with the light of Kol, because Keter came to play.
The only way to get to Keter though is to have the Sod and Ne'evat.
Right, you have to work the field
You have to work
first.
the field. Don't work the field, it doesn't go.
Right. So by the light of Kol shining into the 10 Maimaros that Hashem speaks, Al Yedei Zeh Gam Ba'olam, then right away we're going to experience it as well, since these are the aspects of divine speech which create us. So as soon as you get the divinity to shine into them, they also shine into the world. Because when you have a hamshacha, which is merely according to the order of hishtalshus, which is nature, yesh chiluk ben penimius hamalchus sadeh v'chitzonis hamalchus aretz. There's a big difference when Keter is not in the picture and you're dealing only with the normal order of things. There's a big difference between the internal malchus, the sadeh, the Gan Eden, and the external malchus, the aretz, the dibur.
They're like different.
They're different dimensions. Like an animal is different from a man, right? They don't really mix. And therefore, when the Hamshacha of Malchus is from the level of Mochin, Hagilui hu rak badarga de Malchus shebakabelas mizah penimis Malchus. Right. So then normally this is right when you'll have a big powerful flow of mind trying to get into speech, right, which we said could happen. What winds up happening is that it only is able to be accepted and received inside of the higher part of Malchus, which is touching Zah, the Pneumius of Malchus. You know, so when your mind, which is why we're saying, like when you said, like every person who speaks Torah has this experience, it's not exactly true. Because even when your mind will be like sort of turned on and you're getting your Chochmah, Bina, and Das to sort of give hashpah, the problem is that if you're not accessing the Keter, or some kind of like huge bittul on yourself, then what's taking place is even though there's a huge influx of mind into your faculty of speech, it only goes into the faculty of speech which is the Chochmah, Bina, and Das of your speech, the Pneumius of speech, which is touching Yesod, if you recall. Because why? Because the lower aspects of yourself, there's a block, there's a klippa on them, or at least a heavy levushim on them, which don't allow that to come down to the next level. Therefore, they don't usually come out. They have to first be enclosed in midos in order to come out. Did anyone follow that? So in other words, when there's a big flow of mochin, right, of mind, the only one that's in a normally orderly Seder Ishtalshalus way of doing things, the only one that's able to actually catch that ray is Pneumius of Malchus, who's touching Yesod. Why Yesod? Because we said Yesod is called Kol, which has in it the 50 gates of Bina. So when those 50 gates of Bina are like flushing out, the only one who can usually receive them in a Seder Ishtalshalus is the one who's right below them to catch them. But that doesn't already go down to the next level, and it's hidden from the lower levels of Malchus. They never usually receive that, because in a Seder Ishtalshalus, you don't skip levels. If you're not right under it, you don't catch it.
Right.
Ubadarga the Malchus shehi shorash hanivraim. Whereas when it comes to the level of Malchus, which is the source of creation, the lower part of Malchus, the source of the regular creation, the Yesod of Maimaros, the 10 statements of speech, Eina or Meir, that light does not get to it, doesn't shine. So even if you have unbelievable strings that you're pulling and God is bringing out all the secrets, it could be that all this excitement is happening one world above us and we're completely oblivious to it. Or it could actually happen in your own self, right? That you could basically have all this experience happening and it's like happening in your mind, but it's not able to come out of your mouth. Like we find oftentimes the difference between a chacham, ragil, a regular wise person, and like a super wise person. As a super wise person, they have to explain the chachma to someone else. Whereas a regular wise person, he's wise, he can understand everything, but to bring that level of wisdom out, that requires a whole other thing to happen, a keser. So you find this in all levels.
And with each of the levels, like the like speech, thought, and action, like they each have their own state or status accompanying with it, and those accompany like the different worlds. This is like a very
this is a standard question, but yeah, machshava, dibur, maisa, thought, speech, and action in general represents bri, yitzira, and asiya.
And then
and bri, yitzira, and asiya. And atzilus
right.
is the 10 spheros, which the thought, speech, and action are in clothing, like your 10 kochos hanefesh.
They like each one has the 10 spheres, don't they?
All of them are made out of 10 spheres, just like on minimal levels of contraction, like man, beast.
Right. So like if that's the case as well, like where does Keter fit into all of that?
Keter's beyond all of that.
So Keter's not in all 4 levels?
Well, that's not so simple. It's not revealed in all 4 levels. It's not revealed at all. It's beyond revelation.
It's like the wild card?
It's yeah. I mean, it's basically it's that
Like
Keter is a light which is so high that no vessel can hold it. So therefore, when you're talking about man is a body with very pristine vessels.
Right.
Beast, animal is a body with less pristine vessels. Plants are a body with less pristine vessels, and rocks are a body with less pristine. All of them have light and vessels which hold that light. The reason why Keter is not part of that is because Keter has light which no vessel can hold. And therefore, it does shine actually everywhere. It's just that you can't experience it in any place because you don't have vessels that can hold every like an infinity.
Except for when Yesod comes in.
Except for when you wind up seeing the impossible happen, then you know that Keter is responsible for that. Because this could never be taking place, that a rock can speak and have an intellect unless some force beyond the limitations of the vessels of rock is at play.
So that's what a nace is.
That's what a nace is.
So that's like how...
It's the appearance of Keter.
That's like the science of the nace.
Yeah, the nace is the lower part of Keter. The higher part of Keter. But okay, we'll get to that in its time.
Okay.
Just to keep you on your toes there.
Keep it spicy.
Okay, so back inside here for a few more rounds. So we said in the normal state of Shtalshlus, the mind basically doesn't get to the lower part of Machus, and therefore the area of the world which is created with Hashem's regular speech does not experience any uplift. Bedugmas halavana mizman pegimasa. So I gave one mashal. Let's go with the proper mashal here, which is the union of the moon at the time that is in a state of being pagum, like limited or
missing.
Sha'or HaShemesh Meir Rak Bechetzi. Do you guys have the next page? I think you need the next page, right? Here you go. Pass these around. Just take them fast. David needs one, yeah? Here you go. So what we're saying now, I gave this much about the Chacham and the wise, the greater Chacham and the lesser Chacham. Let's look at the muscle that the Rebbe brings, which is the inyan of the moon. And he says that this is an example of the moon in its time of lack. Sha'or HaShemesh Meir Rak Bechetzi Kadra Elyon Sheba. When there's no moon, basically, when you don't see a moon, there's still light on the other side of the moon.
Right.
And that's called shining, the sun shining on only the higher half of the moon. The moon is exactly shining half light and half darkness. So this, guess what? The moon is Malchus. That's why this is a better example. This is like a perfect example. The moon represents Malchus, right? The sun represents Zan above it. So you can see that the moon has this situation where there's always light shining on one half of it, and only in a sort of volatile way does the light also shine on the other half of it, right? On the half of it that we see. Okay, so what he's saying is when the hamshacha comes from Keter, which we said is totally beyond the ishtalshlus, hagilu gam basar maimaros, then the revelation, as we said, comes all the way down into the 10 statements of creation, which is the world, al yadam gam ba'olam, through the 10 statements of creation into the world, bedugmas halavanam is mana miloi, which is an example of the moon when it's full, which is be'emtza chodesh. So actually, it's not a joke when we say that when the moon is full, Keter is shining. It really is. Like, there's a special, we're like living in like, all this mystical stuff has a huge impact on our life. A full moon has something incredible going on, which is that the whole moon is lit up. And what's going on there is that means that the light, which is normally reserved for only the top part of the moon, makes its way down also to the lower part of the moon. And that means that the Keter must be shining, because that's the only thing that enables that to happen. Right? When the light, which is normally reserved for only the higher echelon, is able to be seen in the lower echelon, it's only because Keter is shining. Right? So Keter comes out, and like this powerful infinity reveals itself every 15th of every month. And that's why the 15th of the month is usually a Jewish holiday. If you go through all the months, almost every single one of them, the 15th of the month is a holiday. Really, if you look at it.
Yeah, that's why everything else also freaks out on the mid-month.
Yeah, the full moon. I mean, it's also yeah. They don't know what to do with themselves on a full moon. The werewolves come out. It's crazy.
The Rabbi talks about lo yechratz kelev v'shono, right?
Yeah. The dogs won't bark.
Even though the full moon, the dogs didn't drive you crazy.
Yeah. So the Indian is also why the full moon also happens to be the 15th. We're gonna learn this in the next mimer we learn on Tu B'Av, which is the 15th is Yud K, right? Yud K is what the Rabbi was speaking about a second ago, that Yud K is usually not shaykh for this world, right? Yud K is in the higher world. We're Vav K. Right. But in the 15th of the month, Yud K shines into Vav K. Like we said, Baruch She'amar V'haya, right? That we experience Pashat something which is not from this world on the 15th of every month. It's from the Gan Eden that we experience, and it only appears here because Keter is shining. So the 15th of every month is Pashat a Yom Tov. Whether even in the month that there's not an official Jewish holiday, there is now. You know, for sure it's a special holiday. It's just that some months, for example, Mar Cheshvan, is an Indian to not have any holidays. But it doesn't mean that the 15th of the month is not the holiday of Mar Cheshvan. It certainly is. It's the greatest revelation of every month. And he says this is okay. So I think She'or Hashemesh Meir Gam B'Chetzi Karra Tachton. Yeah, that the light of the. All right, we have a few more minutes. Let's go on into Dalit. B'Tzrich Lahavin, we have to understand Tilachora Inyan Miut Hayareach, that seemingly the notion of the minimization of the moon, Hu Shebichdei Shiyah Hishavus HaOlamos Nasim Miut V'Chesarun Ba'Malchus, is that in order for there to be the existence of the worlds, there had to be a deduction and a lacking in Malchus. We spoke about this in the very last mimer that we learned, and we've talked about before. It says Ata Sisas Hashamayim, right? In the pasuk it says you created the heavens, but the word Ata is lacking a hey. At, it's written At. It's pronounced Ata. So the word actually is Ata, but it's without the hey is missing. The hey is missing, says the Arizal, to tell you At Chaser Hey, that it's lacking 5. The hey is 5. Right? So in other words, when Hashem created the heavens, He could only do so if He took away 5 things. We spoke about this in the last mimer. That creation actually by Hashem does not come about by making something. It comes about by reducing something. Right. Because it's already there. He's like the Yesha Amiti. He's the true something. And the world is actually only comes into existence because it doesn't experience Him. Not because He's making it, right? It's because Of course he's making it, but the way he makes it is by removing certain layers of himself that are too bright for the world to experience. By the time he removes 5 dimensions of godliness, then suddenly there's a tiny enough ray for us to experience creation and ourselves. So now, what's he doing here? He's saying, wait a second, the reduction of the moon is kind of a good thing, right? Why are we saying that we want to have like Keter blowing out the circuits over here? We won't experience existence anymore, right? Because we know that the only way that existence came into being was that 5 partsufim were removed. Partsufim is basically, a partsuf is a 10-sphera system. So 5 of them had to be removed, meaning to say, what are the 5? Malchus, Za, Bina, Chochma, and Keter. Right? The lower part of Keter. There's different ways that I've seen this explained. But basically that means like all the light which would normally fill all those areas that we just discussed, those 4 dimensions of man, beast, and 4 worlds, originally they weren't showing on their own because they were filled with this light. So we had to remove the light from all those 5 places so that those places would be without infinity drowning them out. So that's what it means. He removed the 5. Basically, he removed the Keter from these 5 dimensions. So it won't shine inside of them the light of Atzilus, which is above all of the existence of creation. They won't have the problem. The cave and Shabagan Eden, Meir Bechinas Kol, and since in Gan Eden we already said it shines the level of Kol, which is Yesod, V'gam HaMochin, which is in principle Yesod, but Yesod also experiences the 50 gates of Bina, so it also has the mind as well. Hari Ein Bo Chasar, and therefore Yesod does not have this lack seemingly, right? Because basically those lacking partsufim seem to be quite found in Yesod, because it has the mochin, it has the mind, it has all kol. K'mavur ba'maimer, that the reason why Gan Eden is called kol, hu ki yesh bo kol bli chasoron, because it has everything without lack. Val pizen nimtzad, accordingly it comes out shegam began Eden halavana malchusi b'shleimus. Therefore, it comes out that in Gan Eden, the moon is full, right? Malchus is full. Okay, here's our question. All this was like a lead up to the question. It looks like, right? Yesod, who's missing the lights? Us in this world to experience creation. But Yesod, it has all the light. It's already filled up with those 5 partsufim. But what we're right, so which means the moon is already full over there. It's only here the moon is not full. But in our mimer, we're explaining that when does the moon become full? Only when the field is worked. What's the field? Kol, Gan Eden. So it looks like you have to do something to the field in order to get it filled up with light, and nonetheless, according to the fact that it's simply called kol, it should be filled up already. That only by doing avoda do you draw down the Keter. Melech hilah, this higher Melech, which is above the ishtashlus. So this we're going to leave here on the question, which is again, why is it that according to what we understand outside of the mimer, Gan Eden already has the full revelation of the fullness of the moon, right? Whereas what we're saying in the mimer is that you only get the full moon when the field is worked. That's when you produce a full moon. If you don't work the field, do something to Gan Eden, then it doesn't have a full moon. So we have a contradiction.
So we have to figure out what that means.
So we have to figure out what that means.
What working the field means.
And why the field needs to be worked in order to have a full moon, primarily. Because seemingly it's already full, because it's called a kol, even without being worked. Okay.
It makes sense, it has to be worked. It makes sense.
Except for the fact that it's already called kol.
What is the work? You're finding midot and Torah?
We do.
Yeah, the work's going to be basically
The work Gan
mitzvahs.
Eden?
12 for Torah.
No, but this is already Gan Eden. In other words, it's not. It exists without us doing any work. Seemingly, it's heaven, right? It's the godly realms. So even if you're not, right now they exist. Even if you're not learning Torah.
We can't experience it. We have to work to bring it so we can experience it.
Experiencing it is another thing. But we're just saying that in order for it to be a full moon, it sounds like, and for it to be not lacking, you have to work it. Because the full moon Keter comes about when you work the field. But if it's already called coal, it's already
not lacking.
It's already not lacking.
It's autonomous.
What's that?
It's autonomous.
Yeah.
So it sounds, so it's defined. By definition.
Right.
It seems.
It's whole already.
Oh, yeah.
It's a trick.
We'll have to see what's going on here.
Right. I don't know if I'll sleep tonight.